Need a historical pattern? Not sure where to find one? Let's discuss how to find patterns that actually make historical garments. Good day everyone, I'm Caitlin, and on this channel I make reproduction clothing and teach historic sewing skills. Today is a little bit of a leap for me because I don't typically use traditional patterns. I usually drape my own or have someone else drape it for me, which is the historical method. Draping gives you a very accurate fit, however it does require a good bit of knowledge of period lines and where to draw all those on a person's body. If you're interested in draping, I do have two how-to videos, one for the 1830s and one for the 1850s and 60s, and I will link those above and also in the description for you to peruse if that's something you're interested in trying. Draping looks very difficult, but I promise it's not hard at all. You just have to have a little bit of knowledge on the lines, and I do teach that to you in the video. But for those of you who insist on patterns, let's take a look at it. That's not who I was talking to. I wasn't talking to you. I know. I'm so sorry. I know. I keep talking, and it's not to you. It's not right, is it? It's not right. Okay. I have my space back. Thank you. Let's start with talking about why we want a solid historical pattern. Now, if you just want a costume for Halloween or for a costume party or a dinner party or whatever, just go get whatever you want to get. If it's just a fun thing for you to do, you're not concerned about wearing the underpinnings, you're not going to like historical reenactment, or you're not working at a museum or at a living history site, do you. It's just a costume, it's fine. Go get whatever looks pretty to you and looks close enough and do whatever makes your heart happy. Also, this video may not be for you, and that's okay. But if you're interested in making clothing like they did back then and want a solid outfit that makes it look like you stepped out of a time portal, then go ahead and keep watching. Let's start by looking at patterns from the big three, namely Simplicity, Butterick, and McCall's. Those are the ones that people are going to know very well. These patterns are very easily accessible, sold at places like Walmart, Hobby Lobby, Joann's. If you have a big enough town, you're going to have one of those, and you have a lot of access to these patterns. But there's a problem. Actually, a couple problems. And the first one is the big three does not have an interest in creating historically accurate garments. They make costumes, and not by the historical meaning. Because yes, the word costume in the 19th century does mean outfit as we would use it today. Like what I'm wearing right now may look funny to you. It's my normal clothes, it's what I wear every day. So to me it's an outfit. In the 19th century we would call it a costume. It's not until much more recently that the word costume shifted to what it means now, which is more like a dress-up item or something you don't wear every day, but an outfit that you put together for a special occasion. But because the big three is not interested in historical accuracy, even when they have a really good designer like Kay Nagy or Nancy Fairstey, they're going to take the pattern that the pattern maker gives them, and first off they're going to add a whole bunch of wearing ease, because modern people don't like to wear fitted garments or aren't used to wearing fitted garments. And no, the stretchy clothes we wear nowadays, those aren't fitted. If they can fit multiple people, they are not fitted. That's just tight. And they also added modern directions to go along with their modern wearing ease. Because apparently modern people would like to spend 20 minutes trying to shove something into a machine when the same thing can be quite easily done in 2 minutes by hand. And look a lot more professional done by hand. So the big three are great for costumes, not necessarily historically accurate garments. Now there's a caveat to that, and if they do use a good designer like Kay Nagy or Nancy Fairstey or a couple of others, who do research and do create their patterns off of original garments or original patterns that were published during that time period, you can actually use those because they're good solid patterns. Just toss the directions in the trash first, because they'll be absolutely useless. And make sure you absolutely do muslin, because it'll probably be way too big for you wearing a corset. So now that we've addressed the big three, let's go ahead and go into what to look for when we're looking at other patterns, whether it be online through Etsy, or if you find another pattern maker at a, I don't know, antique store. I don't know where you find them, conferences, that sort of thing. Let's go over what to look for. Because how do you know if it's a good pattern and it will give you an accurate result? The first thing we're going to do is take a look at the wording that's on the pattern. Does it say things like costume or Regency or Victorian? Those can be red flags. Victorian is a broad range, over 60 years of time, and fashion changes from the banded down sleeves of the big huge 1830s sleeves that have been banded down to the very tight fitted sleeves of the 1840s with very long bodices and skirt length or floor length skirts, all the way up to the 1850s, where we had those really frilly and poofy and everything's trimmed in ribbons, and you get the introduction of the hoop skirt, and then that hoop gets slowly, more and then more back and flatter in front. By the time in the 1860s, you had that elliptical shape where it's very flat out front, and then you have the crenolette where it's basically just a very small hoop in the back, and then that collapses. You get the bustle, the first bustle period in the 1870s, and then that collapses. You get the natural form period, and you get the second bustle period after that, and you get the 1890s, where the 1830s fashions kind of come back in terms they have giant, huge leg unbuttoned sleeves. That's a long time range. There's no way a pattern is going to be capable of fitting a Victorian time period, because Victorian fashion changed all the time. So if you have a pattern that says it's Victorian, it's likely going to lean more towards a Victorian feel or essence as opposed to an actual reconstruction of a historical garment. Even Regency can kind of be a broad term because things do change within the Regency period as well. No 1795 clothes are very different from 1815 clothes. You kind of want to see more of a year range, or at least like a decade when you're looking at patterns. So like saying 1837 through 1841. This pattern will work for those years. Or even a 1830s pattern. Even though things did change within the 1830s, it's okay. That's better than at least seeing the term Victorian or Regency or Romantic. Okay, after we kind of looked at the wording, we're going to go to the back of the pattern. What fabrics are recommended? Do they suggest cotton fabric for that darted 1860s dress that's trimmed with fringe or velvet? Not a period fabric choice for that type of garment. Do they suggest synthetic or man-made fibers for a dress? Not a period choice. If you go to Notions, does it include a zipper for the 18th century style looking gown? Not a period choice. You can tell a lot about a pattern and what kind of result it's going to give you just by looking at the back, going through the fabrics, going through the notions, and seeing kind of vaguely before you even purchase anything, does this look like it might give me a historical garment? Another thing to look for is the size chart. Personally, I think it's always better when they don't have sizes like size 8 or size 2 or size 20. I think it's better if they go by bust sizes, because that is the more, I don't want to say historical because in the 19th century we still don't do that, but at least in the 20th century we went through bust sizes, and it makes a lot more sense to say, okay, I'm a size 44 because that's my bust size, than some arbitrary number that someone made up out of thin air. And that changes all the time, because a 1940s size 4 is not today's size 4. What we are going to look for is when it goes down to the measurements, does it say that the measurements need to be taken over period appropriate undergarments? Because you're not going to get a period size or shape if you're not doing it over your corset, over your girdle, or stays, or whatever else you're wearing for your particular time period. Not mentioning it isn't necessarily a red flag. It may say it within the pattern, but it is kind of something to watch out for if there's other red flags going on. If the pattern maker is not concerned with period fabrics, notions, and techniques on the back of the pattern, you can be pretty sure that what's inside that pattern is also not going to be historically accurate. A very good note that I like to see on patterns is how the size is a baseline, and that you should do a mock-up, or you should fit the garment to yourself before making it up in your final fabric. That's a very good historical choice, and it also notes that things should be fitted to you. You should not be cutting a size 8 pattern because you are normally a size 8 and just wearing it. That is not how things should work. Bonus points if the pattern includes directions on how to fit the pattern to you. That's always a great thing. Alright, next let's look at the pattern maker's page, whether it's a website, an Etsy page, or just if they're with you in person, what kind of patterns do they offer? Are their designs all over the place in terms of time period, or do they have a time range that they focus on? It gets incredibly hard to do solid research when you're kind of all over the board, doing things from medieval time period all the way up through the 1980s. You really can't dig deep. You only have so much time to do research, to look at originals, to really fit all that into your brain. And if you're kind of doing the surface level digging across all time periods, you're not getting real deep, and you don't understand the tiny little nuances that make each time period separate. I would much rather trust a pattern maker that's going to be very niche, saying we do late 19th century dresses here, as opposed to someone who has something from colonial times all the way up through World War II. It's not impossible to do things right, but you'll find that the more time periods people do, the more slight mistakes are being made in terms of what they actually know, or where they may borrow from another time period accidentally without even realizing it. You can't just know something inside and out the way you need to if you're making patterns, if you're doing a bunch of different time frames. Another really important thing to do is to talk to the pattern maker, whether that's through Messenger or, the little Etsy communication thing, in person, whatever communication tool you have, use it. Because we're going to ask them a few things. We're going to ask them, how did you make this pattern? How did you come up with this pattern? You're looking for answers like, I copied this from an original that I have studied in person or own, and then graded it up and made different sizes. Or something like, I found this pattern that was published in whatever year in XYZ magazine, and I graded it up and I fitted it, and then I made different sizes for other people. That's what you're looking for. What you're not looking for is pattern makers who say, oh, I looked at images online and I created this to look like that, or something to that effect. It's something that sounds really good, and I've personally seen from an 1830s girl pattern that did not turn out well. The pattern maker in the pattern had all these lovely pictures of original fashion plates and drawings and paintings talking about it. She really seemed like she knew her stuff. And she talked about how the fashion plates and how we copied it, and look how it's full at the hem and it's fitted here, and you would think, just by looking at it, most people would think that, oh, she knows her stuff. The only problem, this pattern maker had never seen an original garment. She'd also never looked at period dressmaking manuals. And so instead of doing actual research and not just looking at pretty pictures, she used a 1950s circle skirt pattern for that little child's 1830s skirt. This is a published pattern you could buy, by the way. It's probably the only one that's available for 1830s children's patterns, and that's why I'm making real ones, because that one is not great. All the pattern maker saw, because she was looking at images, she was trying to do research, she felt like she was doing a good job. She was looking at fashion plates, trying to tell, okay, this is what this should look like. And she saw fitted at the waist and very full, at the hem. And so in her mind, that's how you do it. You get a circle skirt, you get fitted at the waist, you a very full hem. But that's not a historical technique for the 1830s. We were using straight panels that are either pleated, gauged, or gathered into a waistband, or we're even using gores, which make it slightly smaller at the waist, and doing the same thing, gauging, pleating, gathering, whatever, to a waistband or to the bodice edge. And had she seen original garments, had she looked at period dressmaking manuals, anything, she would have known that that wasn't how you get that shape. The 1950s circle skirt is not how you get that shape. That's one way to get that shape. It's not the 1830s way to get that shape, and that is not appropriate for 1830s reproductions. I truly believe that for a good reproduction, you cannot trust a pattern maker who has not personally handled original garments, or at the very least done a ridiculous amount of studying on period dressmaking manuals of several different time periods of several different kinds. Not just one dressmaking manual, you need to have several, and understanding the nuances or how things are put together. And that pattern maker better be able to tell you how they got their information and how they dated it. But let me tell you, it's a lot easier after studying original garments. And I understand that not everyone can do that. But if you're going to make patterns for historical use, that is a must. Even if it's just one or two. You can take one garment and copy that one garment and say, I copied this one garment. This is a pattern for this one garment. So even if they did unusual things in that one dress, because yes, there are traditional how we make a dress, but sometimes people did really weird things. Everyone's individual, and seamstresses have their own ways, and as long as you can document it to a particular gown and you know it's not been altered in some way later down the road, then you're good. It doesn't take very much, but yes, you do need to be able to handle original garments and study historical dressmaking practices to be able to make patterns. So now that we've discussed some red flags and what to look for and things that we want to see, let's go ahead and take a look at this in practice. So we're going to take some patterns that I found off Etsy, and we're going to discern whether they are good patterns to use for historical dressmaking or not. Let's start with these patterns. This is from Marna Davis. If you see my video from last month, you already know the answer to this one. Scrolling through her patterns, there's a definite range of things. 19th century with a focus on the later half of that century, so that's great. Let's look at her lily pattern. We see a date range, always a great sign. Ooh, their last sentence says, pattern taken from an extant piece in Marna's collection. Excellent. Extant just means original, so it means that this pattern was taken directly from an original dress. She even includes pictures of the original dress, so you can see how the pattern looks similar. It includes period notes, including the original garment, and notes on similar fashions. So it's specifically telling us that we'll get period instructions, which is nice. The fabric suggestions are calico prints, cotton plaids and ginghams, and lightweight wool, which are all period choices. We've hit no red flags on this one, so even if we know nothing about this pattern maker and I needed a dress for this time period, I'd probably buy it. Now, personally, I know Marna, and I know she's an excellent pattern maker. Seriously, I don't know of anyone else for the late 19th century who does such fantastic patterns. I highly, highly suggest the Domestic Ladies Dressmaker if you need bustle or natural form era clothing. Marna has many, many originals that she takes her patterns from and is very gracious in sharing her collection and her knowledge, so please do support her if you are in need of a pattern from that time frame. And if you're ever in Texas area in January, consider coming to the Texas Living History Association conference. Marna, myself, and a ton of other very knowledgeable people typically teach at that conference, and it's a great place to learn. This next one's going to be kind of controversial, but let's look at black snail patterns on Etsy. I have used this one before. I have opinions, but let's go through this objectively first. Right away, I see a yellow flag. I see patterns from 1700 to 1910. That's quite a range. Not awful, but it is a range. It's possible with a ridiculous amount of research. Let's be fair and pick a pattern that I've not personally used. This is an 1837 to 1840 gown. Love the date ranges. And as someone who does study this time period, the dress looks appropriate from that time range. Let's go to the back of the pattern. I love to see two great quotes, one about wearing the proper corset and another about making a mock-up, which is another way of saying, the pattern will need to be fitted to you. Those are both very good things to see in a historical pattern, as we've already discussed. The next page is the same one in German. This particular pattern maker is German, and the patterns are duolingual. I only point this out because I know there can be some second language acquisition errors in the patterns, which might confuse a novice seamstress, but if you've made period garments before, you might be okay with this one. Let's look at the description. We have a tricky one. This dress is based on an extant day dress from the Victoria and Albert Museum, London, and dated 1837 to 1840. That sounds great, doesn't it? I don't like the word based. It does not say copied or taken. Based means the pattern maker has not handled this gown in person and is only looking at pictures to make this pattern. Now, we've already discussed that's not necessarily a red flag, but it's a yellow one, particularly if this pattern maker hasn't extensively studied period dressmaking manuals and or other original garments. Now we get back to the suggested fabrics, and I see not a yellow flag, but more like a green flag that's got a yellow twinge, or a yellow flag with a green hint, if that makes sense. The pattern maker mentions that the original was of chalet, which is going to be wool. She does not recommend wool as a period fabric, though. Now, all the fabrics she does list are period correct, but she's left some out. Now, that could be because it's nearly impossible to find period appropriate wool chalet anymore. The last I saw was over 10 years ago, and it was 90% cotton and 10% wool. So it's entirely possible she left it out because it's not likely anyone's going to find that fabric, so it's not a deal breaker. Down to notions, I do see good things. Fabric, lining, silk ribbon, hooks and eyes, nothing bad. I'd say if you make historical garments before and have some sewing skills and some research of the time period in your belt, this could be plausible for you. Okay, I do have issues with some of her other patterns. This is an 1840s to 1860s underwear set, and it has issues. I'm seeing an over-the-bust corset, which is in no way period correct for that time frame. That chemise is very 1840s and would have been very much out of style by the mid-1850s, and yes, that matters. Overall, that is not a pattern I can recommend. Let's look at her 1830s corset pattern. I have used this pattern before. The corset pattern is totally decent. It's a period shape, period designs, etc. Then there's this chemise that comes with the corset pattern. This is not a chemise. If you look at period garments, dressmaking manuals, etc., you will know that this is actually a nightgown. Yeah, not a chemise. There is one of these at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that is mislabeled as a chemise, and others of the same style are listed as nightgowns. So somebody who just didn't know just slapped a label on that thing at the Met. And I guarantee you that this pattern maker made a pattern off that original. It is not a chemise. It should not be made as a chemise, and especially should not be worn as a chemise. It's little things like this that are subtle, and most people may not notice, but it drastically reduces the pattern maker's credibility. Okay, little rant over. Let's go to wearing history and show a 20th century pattern. I see a range of 1800 to 19 teens. There's a lot of patterns for 1920s to 1950s. So this pattern clearly has an interest and probably much more experience with the first half of the 20th century, and I'd probably trust her research with that time period rather than anything pre-1910. But even when I clicked on the 1800s to 1910s range, I didn't see anything earlier than 1890, which isn't that bad of a time range. Alright, let's click on these combinations. Okay, that's one size only, and I can see why, because it says, included are original period instructions that are text only and very minimal. Okay. So this is an original pattern. This is a major plus in authenticity standards. So we know this one's going to be spot on. The problem is going to be is you don't have a lot of sewing experience, and this may not be the pattern for you, especially if this isn't your size. Next, let's pick this 1940s pajama set. We'll see it's another true period pattern, but this one has more sizes, so the pattern maker has graded it up. The note about it could be an in-public suit does make me nervous because it's not the period pattern's purpose. I'm not saying this pattern maker is wrong, it's not my particular area of expertise, but it does make me kind of nervous. And at the very bottom here, we see these are original historical patterns, and does mention wearing them with historical undergarments, although that doesn't necessarily apply to pajamas, but that's still really nice to see. I would consider this a decent pattern maker. Let's try this one. I just looked up Regency dress pattern. Okay, already we have some red flags. We see the words Halloween costume, fairy dress, Elvis dress. To the untrained eye, the shape looks alright. It appears like the dress opens all the way down the back, which would not be a period choice. There's also fitting at the waist, which is not period. Looking at the description shows nothing about how the pattern maker came up with this pattern, nothing about fitting, period undergarments, or fabric choices, although it's clear by their made-up version that the gown is not a period fabric. And while I can't see the directions and I have no desire to pay to see them, given how the design itself is not period, I highly doubt there's going to be period directions in that pattern. This could be very pretty as a Halloween costume, but not for anything historical. I'd avoid it. Now let's look at this one. Finding 1830s patterns can be hard, so let's try this. Okay, not liking that it doubles as a 1970s dress. Nor do I like that they say vintage inspired or history bounding. Ooh, okay, this pattern is not made for corseted bodies. They're gonna have to stop right there. If you want something historically inspired for a costume party, this may be okay. Do not use this for any type of living history or museum type setting. This would not be appropriate. Okay, let's try this. Past patterns. I don't believe I've used them, and I've heard mixed reviews. Right away, like the date range. It's nice and the dress looks like it fits within that date range. Ah, okay, it's copied from an original in a museum collection. Very nice. Let's look at the back. Oh, that's very nice. A detailed description of the original dress, including thread count. Ooh, I like that. You don't see that very often. Notions all looking good. I like that they mentioned linen thread when hand sewing. That would have been much more common than cotton thread during this time period. Very nice. At the bottom here, they show you exactly which corset pattern to use under this dress, which I do like. Takes the guesswork out of exactly what you need. And that's very helpful. So far, I like this a lot. In the description, it says instructions to sew the garment by hand are included, which is ideal for a time period before sewing machines. Yes, a living historian may choose to machine sew interior seams, although it's not my personal choice. But having period directions is absolutely ideal, because if you just wanted to machine sew them, you just machine sew them, and that's fine. No one sees it. It mentions this dress is to be worn with a corset, which is great. I do love the extra little bits, such as where to buy notions, accessories, etc. And I don't know how easy the instructions are to follow, but I still say this is a very nice pattern to use for reproduction garments. With all that, hopefully now you have an understanding of how to pick a pattern for living history or museum use. Remember to look at the wording. Inspired and costumes are no-goes. Decades are better. Date ranges are great. What fabrics and notions are recommended? Whether mock-ups and period underwear are required or encouraged. Also look at the pattern maker's website or page to see what eras they publish pattern for, how they create their patterns, and if they use just period pictures to get kind of an approximation, or if they actually handle original garments. If you have any other tips or tricks, please let me know below. I know there are people who would really love any other support you can give. And with all that being said, thank you so much for joining me today as we learned about how to pick a period pattern for historical use. If you enjoyed the video or learned something, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more historical content, subscribe to the channel for more historical sewing content, and as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.